Welcome to another episode of Fully Baked. Today we're going to do our starter cake recipe. It is the base cake for any flavors. It'll take most fillings, all types of icing. It's your basic yellow cake. You can convert it to a white cake, which is a little more difficult. But while this is basic vanilla, you can change up your extract and make it lemon, strawberry, almond flavor. It's literally the base cake for wherever you choose to go with it. But also it's the easiest type of cake to start with. It is your basic cake making where you build upon to do your more difficult cakes. So we're gonna learn exactly how to mix your cake, how to keep it from being overmixed, how you can tell if it's overmixed. So let's get started. First thing we're gonna do is wash our hands, as always, with unscented soap so we don't contaminate our food. And then we're gonna go ahead and read our recipe, which in this case, what we're gonna be using today is 12 tablespoons unsalted butter, 1.5 cups sugar, 2 cups all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon salt, 3/4 cup cold milk, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 3 large eggs and 1 yolk. We're gonna be preheating our oven at 350 degrees. Now, I actually remembered for a change to take my butter out of the fridge yesterday, so I have nice room temperature butter, because we want room temperature eggs and butter. But if you remember previously, if you forget to take your butter out, put your bowl or your stick in the microwave 5 seconds at a time till it's soft like it's room temperature. Remembering to rotate it if the microwave doesn't spin on its own for a bowl, or to rotate the side the stick of butter's on. We've got our eggs, which I have coming to room temperature because those I did forget to take out this morning. Remember, warm water in a bowl will bring your eggs to room temperature. Alrighty, so we're gonna need 1 bowl to sift our dry ingredients in and 1 bowl to mix. So we've got our mixer as usual. And we're gonna go ahead and put that together. And again, you can always use a stand mixer or do it by hand if you need to, because you don't need actually any special equipment for this either. So we've got our sifter. We always have our hot pads. So the first thing we're gonna do is make sure we have all our equipment. And the first thing we wanna do is get our pan ready. So in this case, I'm going to be using a 9x13 pan. So I basically get a flat cake, a big rectangle. You can do this recipe. We'll make you 2 9-inch round cakes, which you can get to be evenly distributed by either weighing your batter out or using the scoops to separate into 2 bowls. You can do 2 small squares, springform pan. You can even do 2 loaf pans. All right, we're gonna take our pencil, put our pan on top of our parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you can just spray it with just the baking spray. And what you do to use your parchment paper is you trace the bottom of the pan, making sure it's dark enough that you can see it. And then what you're gonna do is take up your parchment paper, and you're just gonna cut out what you have already traced. Now, if you're thinking, well, now we have pencil on this thing, that's all right. We're going to use pencil side down so that it's not on the side our cake is touching. And you want to use pencil, not pen or marker, because pencil won't bleed through your parchment paper. Most pens shouldn't either, but it's just not a good idea. And marker definitely could bleed through, and if it can bleed through, it could get into the food, and we certainly don't want that. So it is always best to trace out parchment paper. with your pencil. So you just cut around what you've done. And for anyone who sews, it's just like cutting out your sewing pattern. And then I always just stick it in and measure, make sure I got it right. Now I'm going to set that down, put our trash out of the way. Now we're going to take our baking spray and spray the inside of the pan. Now you can buy actual baking spray rather than cooking spray that has flour in it, which is really good for pastries that really need the extra flouring, but this works just as well. So once you get the whole pan sprayed, you go ahead and push your parchment paper down in, and you can see it acts as a glue. And then I always like to still give it a quick spritz on the top just to make sure it doesn't move, make sure we don't have any problems with cake sticking at the end. Then we take our pan and we just set her aside. Alrighty. We've got our milk, we've got a bowl for separating our egg because we gotta remember one egg is only gonna be the yolk. Let's pour out our milk. Now I had it sitting out, which you don't want to do at home, because I turned down my air conditioner so it would stay nice and cold in here, both for the milk and for the dogs. So you're gonna pour it, always keep the measurement you want on the far side, so when you're leaning down and pouring, you can see as the milk comes up to what side it's measured. So I wanted 3/4 of a cup, I put those numbers on the other side and then poured it. And then you always want to come down to the level of the milk, water, or whatever you're pouring into the cup so you can see if it's actually level. So let's put this milk away. All right, we've got our salt, we have our softened butter, our normal characters, and we have our regular spatula, and we have a bowl scraper. Now with the type of bowl I'm going to be using, it's not something I'm actually going to need per se because I have a soft spatula, but if you're using a stand mixer and you know they go down and they're tall, this type of bowl scraper, which is a bit flexible, can get into the bowl and you literally scrape along it and you lose a lot less batter, but it is not necessary. All right, we've got our butter knife for slicing our butter into chunks. We've got our bowl and our sifter. The other thing we're going to need are toothpicks to test the cake's doneness. So we're going to set these guys aside till we need them. We're going to set aside our cooling rack until we need it. And we're going to go ahead, set our hot pads over here as well because we don't need those yet. And then we're going to get our oven on to 350 to preheat. All right, let's pull our ingredients. All right, now we need 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which if you're using sticks is 1 whole stick and 1/2 a stick. Okay, we've got all right, now we have our salts, which we are going to use a 1/4 teaspoon, which my little teaspoons, my set of spoons happens to have the 1/4, not all do. If it doesn't, you want to use about half of your 1/2 teaspoon. I suggest you make sure you have one that has the 1/4. They do make measuring spoons like this that come all the way down to the 1/8 teaspoon. I haven't found that to be terribly necessary. I've only had to do 1/8 of a teaspoon of something very few times. Alrighty. Now, let's get our next dry ingredient, which will be our 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And remember, we have, take it up on our spoon, drag it along, get it flat. Do it again, drag it along, get a flat. Alrighty, let's set this out of the way. Alright, and let's just sift that through real quick. And if you have anything kind of bunched up, you use your finger, push it through. If it's hard, you just dump it out, and that's why we sift. Next, we need our 2 cups of flour. And we will use our baking scraper to be our scraper for our flour today. So as before, get our measure cup, get our scoop. We don't want to pack it in, so we don't want to put the measure cup right in there. Fill it to the rim with flour. We're going to bring it back to the end of the cup, in this case the handle, and then scrape it flat without packing it down into the sifter. So this was 2 cups of flour, so we'll just do that a second time. And make sure it's back to the handle. If it's already back to the handle, you can just scrape forward. And you have 2 full cups of flour. Let's get this sucker out of the way. Now let's just sift that in. Flour is pretty easy to sift, so you just give it a good shake. Again, anything that's a little clumpy from the heat. Now see, this one has a little bit of piece that doesn't want to go through, so we're just going to dump it right out. Then we're just going to take our spoon and give it a good quick stir so that everything is mixed together, not just on top of each other. You can also use a small whisk or a chopstick for this purpose. Either way works. All right. Now we're going to pull that aside. Now, our first instructions on our recipe say to beat the butter and sugar for approximately 5 minutes, which means we can go ahead and put our sugar directly into our mixing bowl instead of a separate one. So I always, because again, as I've said in previous, you can throw the whole stick in to the mixer. If a stand mixer, it's a little bit easier if you do it that way than it is when you do it with a hand mixer. But I prefer to chunk it up a little because it makes it a little easier for the mixer to work the chunks of butter in than a whole entire stick. Now this is nice and soft because I actually for once remembered to take it out the night before. And because I have dogs that can't be trusted, I keep it on top of the fridge out of the way. And it gets nice and soft room temperature but not melted. We'll scrape off the excess butter. Put our trash out of the way. Alrighty, now we'll measure out our sugar, which I want to say they said was 1.5 cups. Yes, it is. We're going to do our sugar the way we do everything else. We'll get a cup full here. Take our scraper so that we get a nice flat top, and we know we're getting the right amount of sugar. And then we need another 1/2 cup. Now, like I said, this is a base cake, base flavor, it's basic vanilla. Right now, if you use lemon zest and lemon extract in it, it makes a lemon cake. If you use strawberry powder or strawberry extract, it makes a strawberry cake. But you can also do things like add coffee and get a bit of a coffee flavor, add coffee and cocoa and get a chocolate. You can add tea flavor. You can literally add anything to make this cake whatever flavor you would like. Alrighty. Now, with cakes and some other pastries, as I've mentioned before, you need to go step by step. So our first step is to beat these butter and sugar for about 5 minutes until it's light and fluffy. So let's get to it. And this is one of the reasons you want your butter room temperature, because you'd have to work twice as hard and twice as long to try and get that butter fully incorporated and light and fluffy. And if you don't, you get pockets of butter and sugar in the cake instead of a nice, smooth, moist cake. Now, if you have a stand mixer, you just put it in your mixer and you let it go for 5 straight minutes. Alright, you can see it's starting to get light and fluffy. Sort of gets the color and consistency of a good fluffy scrambled egg. Give it a good scrape down as you're doing it. Make sure you're getting all the butter in it. All right, we're gonna turn that off for 1 second. We're gonna scrape it down. I'm gonna give you a quick look at it. You can see how much it's lightened up and it's starting to get that fluffy look. We're not quite there, but we're getting there. So as you can see, we kind of look a little fluffy like scrambled eggs. Now, if you don't have a beater and you were doing this by hand, it's going to take you a while, but you just do the same. You just spin it around like this and fold it in upon itself. But now you can see it's a little real light, real fluffy, little airy. Butter and sugar are fully incorporated. You notice you don't see any chunks of sugar or any chunks of butter, so you know you're ready to go. Now here's where it gets important for your cake. We've all had dry cakes. We've all had hard cakes. They weren't real soft. They weren't real moist. It's a trick, but it's not a big deal trick. It's actually quite simple, and I felt kind of silly when I found out that I didn't know, although how would I have, that it was literally this simple to make your nice fluffy cake. We're going to add the eggs one at a time. Now, we've talked about before why we crack it into another item and add them one at a time, even if we're getting ready to mix them all at once, just to make sure there's nothing wrong with the eggs. But today, we will be cracking them into another area and adding them and incorporating them one by one so we can get them fully mixed into the cake, and it'll give us a nice, light, fluffy, moist cake. So let's get our egg cracked. Alrighty, nothing wrong with our egg. So what we're gonna wanna do is put it in, take our scooper out, and I'm gonna scrape it against the beater so we don't lose any of our lovely, fluffy butter mixture. All right, we're gonna incorporate the one egg, literally, let me show you the egg sitting on top. We're going to beat this in, literally till it is just incorporated. when I say just incorporated, the egg is in, and then we stop mixing and we move on to our second egg. Here's our second egg. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to pour it in, and we're just going to mix it till it's incorporated. And as you can see, each egg does not take much time, but by only doing it until we incorporate it, it stays nice and fluffy. Egg number 3. Same thing. And this is a really good recipe to learn about just until incorporated, because when you do more difficult things, things will say that, and you need to understand what that means so that you don't under or over mix things. Now, we had 3 whole eggs. We need 1 egg yolk, so we need to separate the egg. Now, this is where clean hands come in again. You can take it, split your egg, go back and forth between the shell until you have all the white into the bowl and the yolk just in here. But I always tend to make a messy crack. I don't know if it's the type of eggs or just me. So there is another way to do this. But again, this is where your clean hands come in. So make sure your hands were washed and clean, and that you have a second bowl. This is also why we needed 2 bowls. You're gonna take your hand, reach in, and literally pull the egg yolk out. Drop the white off of it. Takes a second, and it is slimy. Sometimes you need a second hand to give that a pull off. So you pull all that white off. You should be left with just your yolk, like that. Now, there is a third nifty way to, let me wash my hands again now that I have egg white all over them. There is a nifty third way to separate your eggs. If you have a clean, empty water bottle, you know, the kind you buy at the store, come in like a 12-pack, or clean, washed out soda bottle, and you hold it over a whole egg and squeeze it, it will separate the egg for you. I didn't have a bottle to show you with, but if you check YouTube, you can see the life hack video. So you take your egg yolk and do exactly what we did with the whole egg and mix it till it's just incorporated. All right, so as we see, we have a very light, fluffy mixture. Now, our next step is going to be add our vanilla at this time, okay? And then we're also gonna mix this same way we do that, which is till it's just incorporated. You can also use vanilla bean paste if you want to get that true vanilla bean flavor, and you don't wanna buy vanilla beans because they are super expensive. So let's go ahead and do our vanilla. And it calls for 2 teaspoons. I always add a little extra. I like my stuff very vanilla-y. That is a personal choice. Some people do not. And like I said, you can change your extract flavor at this point to any flavor you want this cake to be. So you give it a good mix, just until it's incorporated. Now, at this point, I always scrape down my sides because we're going to start alternating our dry and wet ingredient mixture into our batter. And what that means is we want this to begin and end with our dry ingredient. So we're going to do 1/3 of this into here, give it a little mix, scrape down the side, add 1/2 of the milk mixture, another 1/3 of this, the rest of the milk, and the final 1/3. So First thing we'll do is get our little scooper out of the way. We're going to take about a third. You're just going to want to eyeball this. This isn't, you know, you don't have to be that precise. You just want to make sure it's about a third. Give it a quick incorporation. You don't need it fully incorporated at this point. And again, we can eyeball the milk mixture. You can just go half of it. Now you just want to give it a quick mix. Now remember, if you're using a stand mixer, that you need to make sure the bottom of the bowl gets scraped. So let's give it a good scrape. Make sure all the flour or anything that went up the side of the bowl is pushed back down so that we can incorporate it. We're going to go with our next third of dry ingredients. And we're going to give it a quick mix. And then we're going to add the rest of our wet. So at this point, we should have no more wet ingredients and 1/3 left of the dry. We're going to give it another good scrape. Again, make sure you get anything that's at the bottom of the bowl, which is where the flour likes to hide. All right, now we'll get that last third of the flour in. Let's put this bowl out of the way. We're going to do a quick mix to basically get it a little mixed in, scrape the bowl down, and then we're going to mix it just until it's fully incorporated. We'll give it a last mix with the spatula to make sure that we get all the flour incorporated. This is where we want to be sure we're just incorporating, because if you over mix it at this point, you get tunneling. Have you ever seen those cakes when they're cut and there's big holes in them? It looks almost like either somebody poked it or like an English muffin inside. That's because a cake was over mixed. Under mixed, you'll get pockets of flour that end up uncooked within the batter, within the cake that is finished. So you want to get that delicate balance between just incorporated and over mixed. So we give it one quick good mix, a light mix so that we can scrape everything in, and then we're going to do our final mix with the beaters. Make sure we get the bottom up. And you should see it's getting to be a thicker batter. And now we're going to literally just go until we stop seeing bits of flour. All right, bits of flour are going off the top. So what we want to do at this point is a little quick hand mix just to make sure we didn't miss anything. And that way you won't over mix it, but you won't have any pockets of flour. If you find a pocket of flour, you want to fold. Go to the bottom of the bowl, pull it to the top. Bottom of the bowl, pull it to the top. It's just a flick of the wrist. You go under, flip it over. Now I notice I have some flour on the side of the bowl, so I'm going to scrape that in, fold it one more time. Now you can see this is a nice thick cake batter. This is the consistency you're looking for with this particular recipe. All right, let's get this equipment out of the way. And now we get our pan. And since we're using a 9x13, we're literally just going to pour our batter in because we're all putting it all in one pan, so we don't need to worry about it being even. Now, if you're doing it in the two 9-inch pans, 9-inch round pans, you can go ahead, like I said, and use the scoops to make sure it's even. You can put it on a food scale and make sure you get an even amount. Or you can eyeball it if it's not that important, if it's exactly even. All right, so here's where I would use a the bowl scraper rather, when I have the more oblong bowls. You can see how well that scrapes out the inside of this bowl by this empty spot right here compared to this side that was only the spatula. Now, you don't waste as much cake batter, but you also don't have as much to nibble on when you're cleaning up. You can see that pretty well cleans out your bowl. And I got cake on the side, so I'm going to take it off with my finger because I don't want that to burn. Take your spatula. Got a little on the counter too, which we want to get out of the way. We don't want that on the bottom of our pan. Take your spatula, spread your cake batter over your pan as evenly as possible. I like to rotate the pan while I do it. It makes it easier for me to get it the feel for where it is, and that I've got my corners filled in and that they're not smaller than the rest of the cake. Now, all right. You'll see some people take their cakes raw to get air out of the batter, give it a good shake to even it out. You can, especially with a thinner batter, that can really help. This is a thicker batter. It's not really necessary, but it's not hurting nothing to do it. So we're going to take our pan, as always, the middle rack of the oven, which has come to temperature while we were making our recipe together. I always like to keep the light on so I can keep an eye on my baking good. Get that in the oven. All right, and then this cake bakes for 25 to 30 minutes. Always start with the bottom end unless you know your oven tends to run low, in which case then you could start with the higher temperature. All right, I will be back with y'all as soon as the cake comes out of the oven. Okay, as you can hear, or will hear, there it goes, our 25 minutes are up. So what we're gonna do, let's shut the annoying timer off, and we're gonna test our cake. Toothpick, or a barbecue skewer, you know, the bamboo ones you can buy. You can use those too, which are really good if you have a really big cake. Butter knife in a pinch will do, but you will have a little bit of a bigger mark in your cake. So we're just gonna slide our cake out. You wanna take the deepest part of your cake, put your toothpick in to the bottom, pull it out. Now, as you can see on this toothpick, there's a little crumb, but no actual cake batter. That tells you your cake is done. If it comes out with any cake batter, it's not done. So let's close up our oven, turn it off, turn the light off rather. I'm gonna show you a little something else. If you listen to your cake, if it is done speaking to you where it's not making any noises, it's done cooking. But more reliable is the push test. Should be firm yet springy. See how I'm poking it and it pops right back up? All right, so we're gonna put this here and we're gonna let it chill in the pan for about 5 minutes. After about 5 minutes, I'm gonna use a cutting board to show you how to pull out a cake of this size without breaking it. And we'll get it to cooling so I can show you what it looks like on the inside. So I will be back with you as soon as the cake is cool enough to take out of the pan. Okay, our cake ought to be good enough to take out. So I'm going to get a butter knife. And one of the tricks about making sure your cake or cupcakes or anything else come out of your pan without ripping is just take your butter knife and slide it in around the edges. And then you will be able to make sure your cake doesn't stick. Just do it gently so you don't rip your cake. You don't want to slide it, you want to just sort of go up and down gently. And if you have some crunchy bits, go a little slower. Because if you don't get that little bit of edge that maybe is trying to be sticky, when you go to flip your cake, you could actually rip your cake. And for some reason, certain edges like to get crunchier than others. So now I've gone all the way around the cake, just like this. Now, because this is in a little circle cake and it's pretty close to the size of my rack, I like to take my pan, this isn't hot, too hot to the touch now, take a cutting board that is larger than the cake, put it on top so that I'm grabbing the cake pan, and then just flip. Which will dump out your cake upside down, give it a quick knock, lift, and you should be left with your cake. Now we want to make sure we put it onto our open drying rack or our open cooling rack so that we get the airflow. So what we're going to do is basically the same thing in the opposite direction. And that way our cake is never actually off of a solid surface. Voila. And it has no chance of breaking or cracking because it was still warm. So you get a nice cake. All right, I'm gonna wash some pans and then I will get back with you when this is cool enough to cut. And I'm gonna slice it in half to show you what it looks like inside. Now, you may be thinking decoration. This cake will hold up to buttercream, French buttercream, Swiss meringue, cream cheese frosting, Cool Whip. You can go a different route with toppings. You can dust it with cocoa powder. You can dust it with powdered sugar. You can even put a stencil, dust it with the powdered sugar, lift it up. You'll have a nice decoration. You can make a chocolate sauce, a white chocolate sauce, a warm cream sauce, a berry sauce. I like it with like a little bit of fresh fruit, or just plain, personally. But since we weren't doing any decoration today, I'm gonna portion this up and freeze it for future dessert needs. If we were going to frost it, we would let it cool 100%. I even like to, once they're cool, put them in the freezer for a good 15 minutes to a half hour before I crumb coat so it sticks, but doesn't pull the cake. But we're not doing frosting this week, or this month rather. At a later date, we'll do a frosted cake. But if you did rounds and you want to do a 2-layer, this cake holds up to wonderful fillings. You could do curd, like lemon curd. You can do a mousse filling, just a buttercream filling, mascarpone cheese filling, fruit, compote, jam, anything like that can be done with this cake. It'll hold up to and stand up to the flavors with this. All right, like I said, we'll come back once this is cool enough to cut. All right, we're gonna go ahead and slice the cake. I'm going to use the fact that these are about the same height to just slide our cake off onto the cutting board. Okay, so now we've got this cake. Well, this is also, I might add, if you wanted to cover this with fondant, it is a cake that stands up well to that as well. And like I said, I'm just gonna cut this in half so you can see the inside of this cake. And you can see that it is fluffy, moist, springs back a little when you hit it, and it doesn't have any large holes that are called tunneling. This is what your cake should look like when you're finished. Alrighty. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future bakes, let me know. Drop a message in the comments. Drop me a message on Twitter or Instagram. We're going to be doing brownies next month. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, both at Samkist, SAMKIST, for both. And once again, I'd like to thank FTF Media, For the Fans Media, and Haley and Mark specifically for giving me a place to post my videos. Thank you, and see you all next month.